Hi everyone. Today we are going to be discussing credit speculation and crash. These are your warm-up questions. During the 1920s, Americans bought products such as vacuums, irons, washers, and refrigerators. How did these goods impact, shape, or modernize life? This is something that we talked about in the previous lesson. What motivates consumers? Why do people buy things? Have you heard the term consumer culture before? What do you think it could mean? All right, for the first one, as always, please pause to think. For the first one, these goods are going to really free up people's time. So they're going to feed into this consumer culture. People want the best, the newest, the shiniest product that's going to work the best for their home and their needs. And these products are going to really minimize the time needed to devote to household tasks. These products will cut in half that kind of time, which frees up women's experiences outside of the home to get more involved in work, in politics, things like that. What motivates consumers or why do people buy things? Ads can really motivate consumers to buy things. Kind of this culture of all my friends have it, I want to have it. That can really motivate people to buy things. Those are a few possible answers. And consumer culture, we didn't use that exact term in the 1920s culture lesson. However, we talked about how people are buying into these products more and more. And this is a term that's really thrown around a lot today as well. Consumer culture is this idea that people are always wanting to purchase the newest, the best, the brightest product possible. And the companies, therefore, are always working to improve their products and sell something new and shiny to the general public. All right, so on the lesson today, that was your warm up. If you're in class, we're going to do this stock market simulation. However, I'm not going to explain it over the video because it would just be giving directions, and this is not something that you would have to make up if you are absent. And then we are going to do these notes on credit speculation and crash, and then an exit ticket, which is related to this question of the day, this essential question: how did the stock market crash and resulting economic depression impact the movement and culture of Americans? So I'm going to skip all of this simulation stuff for now and go on to our slides. From 1929 to 1939, the stock market crashed. What happens if a stock market crashes? People who have invested in stocks lose out on a lot of money. Most people put savings or extra money into stocks, trying to say that they hope that that money will build. However, they know that they have it in their back pocket if they ever need to pull from that stock. Now it's gone. They can't pull from that stock. It crashed. They could wait and see if the stock rebuilds, but it's a risky business. Many people at this time didn't realize the effect it would have, and they had no money to replenish what was borrowed. Many found being broke to be humiliating. They were never expecting it. The Roaring Twenties had this new concept of credit. People were buying automobiles, appliances, and clothes. And fun times were reigning, like dancing, flappers, and drinking. Remember the previous lesson, who are flappers? Those are emancipated young women living off of urban styles, new lifestyles, modernized clothing, more involvement outside of the home. In the credit system, people didn't really have the money that they were spending. During World War I, the United States was a major credit loaner to other nations in need. Many of these nations could not pay the United States back. What are the consequences if a nation does not pay if a nation does not pay the United States back? The United States pretty much loses out on that money. Or of course they can continue trying to pursue it, but if the other nation doesn't have anything to pay with, there's not really much the United States can do if they don't want to go to war over that or anything, which they don't want to during this time. They just got out of World War I. That wouldn't be very popular. The interest rates on loans were too low because there was too much borrowing. And the interest rates on savings were also too low because there was too much spending because of inflation. What is inflation? It's probably a term you hear thrown around a lot even today. It's this idea that over time, money becomes worth less. If there's a lot of money in the market, it's going to allow the producers to drive up and up the prices, and people can't keep on just paying those prices. There's also excessive real estate construction, so there's an oversupply. How did borrowing money contribute to the Great Depression? Think about that. It's kind of asking you to summarize these last few slides. People are borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, putting themselves into debt with the mindset that they'll be able to pay it off later, but they're not expecting the market to crash, and therefore they're not able to pay it back later. Wealth is distributed unevenly during this time. Corporate profits rose 65% during the 20s. The rich became much richer during this time, while the workers' conditions only improved slightly. When we say bad working conditions, what are we talking about? Think back to previous lessons. We have child labor, low wages, long hours, limited workers' compensation available in times of injury, limited maternity leave available, limited protections from being fired, things like that. Unions' influences decreased following World War I. Here are some examples of 1920s and 30s salaries, to compare in your mind what you know about what people make today. Bus drivers would be making about 43 cents. My bad, I'm sorry. 43 cents an hour. Teachers, $1,227 a year. Waitresses, 20 cents an hour. Farmhands, 7 cents an hour. What do you think that the first minimum wage was under FDR? 25 cents an hour. And how do you think that wages might have been different for people of color? Lower. There was more competitive job market for people of color, unfortunately, and the employers would typically hire them for less overall wages than they would hire white workers. The highest paid production workers in the 1920s worked at Ford Motor Company for $5 a day or 48 cents an hour. Farm prices for potatoes, cotton, and pork were 1 cent and 5 cents. There were a lot of poor people and very few rich people. Remember our lessons on Vanderbilt, Carnegie, people like that? Workers earned so little that they couldn't buy the products they produced. Wages were as little as 20 to 25 cents per hour. We've had a lot of inflation over time since then. How much do you think that would be worth now? I actually need to look that up because when I created this slide, I knew, but I don't remember anymore. Let's Google. How much is 25 cents in 1920 worth today? $3.71. Crazy. Not very much. You couldn't do very much with $3.21 today. Even the best employer, Ford Motor Company, only paid that $5 a day for the 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. shift, as mentioned on the last slide. Therefore, how did the uneven distribution of wealth lead to the Great Depression? The rich were controlling so high of a portion of the money that they were able to pay the workers so little. So those workers were unlikely to be able to build emergency savings. People bought stocks on margins, which is another form of credit. That's a vocabulary word you need to know, this margins word. If a stock is $100, you can pay $10 now and the rest later when the stock rose. But make a guess. Can you purchase stocks on credit cards or margin today? No, because something very terrible happened here. The stocks fell. Now that person has less than $100 and no money to pay back the bank. The idea here is that the stock is going to rise, so it'll be really easy for them to pay the other $90 when it rises. But if it falls, their stock is worth nothing, and then they still owe $90 to that company, even though their stock is nothing. Problematic. Investors panicked about their money and tried to sell their stocks. This led to a huge decline in stocks, and stocks were pretty much worthless. People who bought on margins now could not pay. Remember, what are margins again? That's credit. You have to remember that one. Investors were average people that were now broke. How did the stock market contribute to the Great Depression? This idea of buying stock on margins or credit allowed people to take even greater risks than they would have been taking under investing that money if they had been investing that money straight up. Now they're indebted. Rather than just losing all their money, they were indebted to a stock market that was worth nothing. Farmers were already feeling the effects. Prices of crops went down and many farms foreclosed. People could not afford luxuries. Factories shut down, businesses went out. Banks could not pay out money. People could not pay their taxes. Schools shut down due to lack of funds, and many families became homeless and had to live in shanties. African American people were often last hired and first fired. How would that impact their experience during the Great Depression? Well, if there's these major layoffs occurring, and African American people are typically the first fired, they'll be experiencing the highest rates of unemployment among different ethnic groups during the time. Due to increased technology, good growing conditions, and supply greater than demand, agricultural industries faced a lot of overproduction issues. Demand was higher during World War I, so that's why they were producing so much. Why was it higher during World War I? The government was buying a lot of this food to feed the military. Now the government is not a main purchaser of their food any longer. What is the Great Dust Bowl? It's the overuse and overgrazing of no crop rotation, no soil conservation, no windbreaks, loss of natural grasses and animals, and climatic change of the drought of the 1930s, causing very harsh environmental conditions. What do you think is going to happen in this Great Dust Bowl? Makes it extremely difficult for food to be grown, for agriculture to be successful. Therefore, what caused the Great Dust Bowl? It's your question here. See it on the last slide. No crop rotation, overuse, overgrazing, no soil conservation, no windbreaks, lots of natural grasses and animals, and climatic change of the droughts of the 1930s. We also have over speculation of this get rich quick syndrome due to the margin buying, the lack of government regulation, and panic selling. How can it cause a crash if everyone sells their stocks? Stocks are priced based on the demand for that stock. Everybody wants a Google stock, so that one's going to be a little bit more expensive than some little small business you never heard of. If everybody starts selling their Google stocks, that's an indication that people are not believing in Google anymore, and that you should probably sell your stock too, because it's not going to be going up in value if people are feeling like that company might not have a great future. That's just a random example. In 1929, the market crashed. This is a photo of the New York Stock Exchange on Black Friday, October 24th, 1929. So you see everybody, like now if you invest in stocks, it's literally just online. You just look at it on your computer. But at that time, you went to the physical stock exchange and bought your stocks with cash. Everybody is rushing there, running, pushing, shoving. Look at those crowds, not straight lines. They're trying to make their way to the front, trying to be the first to pull out their stocks. Because if you're in the front of the line, your stock when you pull it out, it's probably going to be worth more than if you're in the back of the line coming at 4:50 p.m. It's gone down throughout the day. The crisis in confidence frightened depositors who feared for their money. Millions tried to withdraw their money because they feared the banks losing it. In 1929, 641 banks had failed. By 1930, 1,350 banks had failed. And by 1931, 1,700 banks had failed. How much money do banks actually have on hand at any given time? What do you think? They actually don't have all your money that you've put in the bank. They use that money to help other people to take loans. So, for example, say I have $50,000 in the bank, I wish. They're not going to just keep that $50,000 sitting there waiting for me to be ready to pull out. They are going to lend that $50,000 to somebody else to go towards their house. And then the person who owes that money on their house is going to be paying the bank back over time. So the bank has a portion of everybody's money at the time. But if every single person tries to go to the bank and get out their money, all of their money on the exact same day, the bank is not going to have it for you. And that is what happened during this run on banks. Banks were foreclosing. Talk about President Hoover. Very unpopular, unfortunately. He was a conservative president. He believed in individualism, and he did not do much to help with the Great Depression. People were looking for help, and no solutions were coming. But, valid opinion, how much do you think that the government should step in during a recession or a depression? Hoover's ideology was that this was a natural cycle of the economy. It's not the government's job to step in and try to fix that, because in a true capitalistic environment, hypothetically, it would fix itself. That's the argument there, but you could argue the opposite as well. Prior to the Great Depression, the United States government ignored the business cycles of the United States economy. The government believed that the American economy could fix itself. Which group believed this, Republicans or Democrats? Think about Hoover is a Republican. What is he thinking? Laissez-faire. So Republicans believe in this laissez-faire. Therefore, I just gave this away. Do you predict that President Hoover will embrace or reject laissez-faire policies? Embrace. He does not want to get the government involved in trying to solve the Great Depression. He doesn't do much. He's hands off. He's laissez-faire. He's waiting for it to fix itself. The boom prosperity peak is what they were hoping would continue. During the 1920s, there was high demand, a desire for more products, greater investment, more production, higher employment, more demand, higher prices, and inflation. In 2020, it's 2023 now. In 2023, do you think that we are in an economic boom or a bust? That's an opinion question. Decide what you think, bring in some evidence. I'd say most people will probably say that we're in a boom. However, there was poor monetary policy. The Federal Reserve increased interest rates, which made money borrowing more expensive and saving more attractive, instead of lowering interest rates to give that economy a jump start. What must happen for an economy to improve after a downfall? Probably going to have to be, typically, in the United States, the Federal Reserve will adjust the interest rates to adjust the perceived value of money and encourage people to spend. The Hoover administration and Congress cut spending and raised taxes to balance the budget, instead of increasing spending and cutting taxes to jumpstart the economy. In that second scenario, he would be temporarily deficit spending. So they would go over the balanced budget. They would not have a balanced budget. They'd be spending a little bit more than they were taking in. What happens if the government is spending a little bit less money? They might have to be laying off some government employees. They might have to be defunding some government programs. Think about maybe some construction programs going on. Maybe they'll say, oh, we're not going to work on that right now. We don't really have the money for it. Well, what happens to those construction employees? Probably will no longer have a job for a while. We also saw high tariffs during this time period. What are tariffs? Taxes on imported goods. The United States taxed foreign imports to protect their products under Hoover with the Hawley-Smoot tariff. It was passed and it was the highest protective tariff in United States history. Foreign nations taxed imports from the United States in relation. The higher prices fed under consumption, and the nation stopped paying World War I debts in the US. All right, I want you to choose one of the causes of the Great Depression that you feel like you understand the best to re-explain to people around you. Buying on credit, unequal distribution of wealth, stock speculation, the Great Dust Bowl, bank collapse, or lack of government help. Speak to one another if you are in class. Well, let's pick just one to talk about here. Let's talk about the Dust Bowl again. So, just randomly selected. The Dust Bowl is due to these climate conditions in the Western farms where most of the United States' food is coming from at the time. There's less food being produced, which would make it harder for people to access and contribute to a rise in poverty and economic depression. This is just a graphic of those factors causing the Great Depression that we discussed. We've got the Great Dust Bowl, uneven distribution of wealth, buying on credit, stock speculation, lack of government help, and banks collapsing. These 6 causes, you do need to be able to explain, understand all of the 6 causes. Just a little bit more about the Dust Bowl. The Southern Plains were covered with shortgrass prairie. The enlarged Homestead Act in 1909 created more farmers in the region, replacing cattle ranching. Recall, what was the Homestead Act? That was the idea that would encourage people who lived in the East to move to the West and convince them, hypothetically, to farm that land. In exchange for free land, they would be obligated to farm that land. So it was a goal to encourage or increase the number of people moving west. The wheat market boomed during World War I. It was 93 cents for a bushel of wheat in 1914 and $2.50 in 1919. However, lack of rainfall and poor farming techniques caused the soil to blow away, and over 3 million plain farmers left their farms during this time. This was one of the worst environmental disasters in the United States history. Here is a small Great Depression timeline. We have Black Thursday on October 24th, 1929. Dow Jones Industrial Average drops 11%. On Black Monday, the Dow falls an additional 13%. And on Black Tuesday, over 16 million shares sold as the Dow falls further 12%. Hoover passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act. It was signed into law raising tariffs, and other countries immediately retaliated by also raising tariffs, so that it made it more difficult for the United States to receive products from other countries, which is, of course, going to be terrible because of the Great Depression. They're having a hard time producing their own goods, as well as make it more difficult for the United States industries to sell their goods abroad, which is going to make it more challenging as well because people within the United States don't have the money to buy this stuff right now. So if they could have sold it abroad, maybe that would have helped. But these tariffs, countries backlashing each other, trying to create these other tariffs, really limits how well the economy can do. The unemployment rate passed 20% by 1932. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt defeated Herbert Hoover in landslide victory for a presidential election. People did not enjoy Hoover. Here's an example. Hard times are still hoovering over us. It's an insult to President Hoover. What advice would you give to President Hoover during the early years of the Great Depression? want to hear from you guys on that, so I'm not going to speak to that question. I hope you can tell from the passion in my voice that I would have a lot of advice for him. I would like you to decide if you agree or disagree with these programs that Hoover created. First, we have rugged individualism. Hoover believed government involvement to solve economic problems would actually lead to more instability. Hoover called on business leaders to maintain production and employment. He also relied on the American people to help each other out during hard times. In November 1929, Hoover invited business leaders to the White House and secured promises to maintain wages. Hoover believed financial losses should also impact profit, not employment or wages. Do you agree? This was a good idea to support rugged individualism, or disagree? I will not speak to it because I would like you to form your own opinions. No direct relief. Hoover believed if the government provided direct relief to the American people, states, industry, and American neighbors, would no longer take the initiative to help. He felt government aid would destroy neighborly goodwill and self-motivation to, quote, pull yourself up from the bootstraps, end quote. He asked Congress for a $160 million tax cut to double spending on federal works programs. Form an opinion. All right, we've got some more from Hoover. We've got supporting industry. Hoover abandoned laissez-faire policies of the 1920s and bailed out big businesses, the railroad, and banks by creating the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. He secured promises to speed up the pace of large-scale construction programs to aid employment by 1930. He signed the Hawley-Smoot Tariff to protect American agricultural and industrial sectors, which backfired when European nations raised prices. Agree or disagree, and why? Hoover also supported trickle-down economics. You might still hear this thrown around today. Hoover believed if the government supported industry, industry could remain operational and keep Americans employed. He believed the benefits of prosperous business would benefit the public. Hoover relied on industry to share their prosperity with their employees. As you decide if you agree or disagree with these, keep in mind that the description is kind of from Hoover's point of view. So he is going to be like explaining why he thinks it's a good idea. So you have to kind of think outside the box as to why it might not be the best idea ever. All right, one more regarding the continued employment, 1930. To address the growing unemployment, Hoover created the President's Emergency Committee for Employment to coordinate state and local relief programs. The PECE saw limited success due to lack of overall coordination. Hoover saw the Federal Reserve to extend more credit and persuaded Congress to transfer agricultural surplus to the American Red Cross for relief efforts. In 1931, PECE transitioned to the President's Organizations for Unemployment Relief, POR, and raised millions for unemployment benefits, but could not meet the increasing needs as unemployment continued to increase. Agree this was a good idea or disagree, and why? Overall, does Hoover deserve the blame for the Great Depression? Some things to consider are, did Hoover's economic beliefs and policies accelerate, decelerate the pace of the Great Depression? Accelerate or decelerate? And did Hoover do enough to intervene in the early years of the Great Depression? What else could he have done? This is opinion, so I'm not going to speak to it. For the final exit ticket, you're going to use your reflection from the simulation that we did in class, your notes, and the information provided in this video to identify and explain the top 3 causes of the Great Depression. For time, I'm not going to play it right now. Just think back to this table. Which 3 do you think were most significant? Thank you all so much. Talk to you soon. Bye.